Third part. The shadowy figures of Kyle and Morgoth clung like geckos to the rocky face overlooking the village of the Barbaroi. The mountain, which was insurmountable to the average traveler, hadn't served as much of a deterrent against this pair. Sprawled on a flat rock and inspecting the village through electronic binoculars, Kyle raised his head and said to Morgoth, "Damn it, the carriage and whatever's in it went into the forest, but they ain't come out. You think maybe they've already slipped back out the same way they got in?" "Don't know." Morgoth shook his head. "And it's not like we can just waltz up and ask them, now can we?" Kyle fell into silence. Somehow they'd managed to climb part way up the mountain without being detected. But even this pair of crafty devils were hesitant to sneak into the village. In fact, their hunter instincts told them it'd be dangerous to get any closer in broad daylight. Even though Barbaroi seemed like a run-of-the-mill hidden village, with no sign of watchtowers or lookouts, the fact was that in the nondescript shade of the rocks and groves there lurked those with sight as keen as swords. Conversing only with their eyes, the brothers decided to sneak in by night, when the watch would be slackened. The Marcus brothers knew that the noble who owned the carriage had called on this village hoping to retain some guards, if possible. The brothers wanted to finish him before he could do so, but now that it had gone this far, that was no longer an option. The two brothers weren't at all confident they could slip into this mob of freaks, who were their equals, or perhaps even their superiors in battle, and accomplish their aims. Under the circumstances, there was no choice but to wait for the carriage to come out, but they had misgivings about that, too. They couldn't imagine how the carriage had possibly been brought into the village, and the prospects of it slipping out unseen were extremely good. They wouldn't know it had left until it was gone. If only they knew the noble's destination, they could at least head him off, but they didn't even know their prey's name. At the rate things are going, we'll never land that bounty. The Marcus brothers grew impatient at that thought. And as they fumed, more of their precious time slipped by. When they'd first got up to their lookout, the carriage was being moved from the square into a stand of trees. Even after they watched the people disperse from the area, it seemed there had been some sort of a discussion. Common sense dictated that the nobility slept by day, but then common sense didn't seem to have much say about matters in this village. So what had they discussed? Well, the Marcus brothers actually had a pretty good idea of what had been covered. They could guess how many guards the noble had employed and what kind they would be, and maybe where they were headed, too. The sun was nearing noon. The rocky surface went from warm to searing, and yet the brothers still lacked a good plan. A hue of impatience was just beginning to show on Morgoth's face when he heard a sudden cry. "Bro, is that who I think it is?" Checking Kyle's surprised outburst with his firm, silent gaze, Morgoth felt the same shock as his brother. Off to their left, a figure had just leisurely slipped into the black cavern leading to the village, and it looked like it was Dee. "That bastard should have drowned." "What? Ain't he a dampier?" Morgoth didn't answer Kyle's question. He was having enough trouble believing it himself. "Then, I reckon that means Nolt's had it." Turning to his older brother for only a second, Kyle's face was instantly colored by hatred. That bastard, killing off Nolt. He's not getting out of this alive, he growled. Ain't that right, bro? And though he nodded, Borgoff kept his silence. And difficult as it might be to accept, Borgoff knew that Nolt had to be dead, and that D must have killed him. But killing a noble with an escort of Barbaroi would entail risking their lives. And this young Dampier possessed an unearthly intensity even they couldn't match, and making an enemy of him as well would be utter madness. I bet that bastard's here to scope out the village, same as us. This is our chance. I'll take him down from here with my crescent blades. As the younger brother was about to stand, Borgoff's hand took a firm grip on his elbow. Hold your horses, okay? Look, he's headed straight for the gate. He ain't staking it out. He plans on parlaying with them directly. You kidding me? Damn it, ain't that even worse? If this keeps up, he's gonna beat us to the punch. The words of the wild youngest brother held some truth. As Borgoff glared fixedly into space, his face grew more and more sad, and sweat started to blur his brow. When his eyes opened, there was a ghastly hue to them. We got no choice then. I didn't want to do this, but we'll have to call on Grove, he said. Wait just a minute there, Kyle said, his voice rigid. This was the same brother who'd earned a glare from Borgoff for suggesting they send Grovek out to scout the village of the dead they'd entered 2 days earlier. What kind of power lay in that shriveled mummy of a youth that could offer a solution to their problems? I'll keep watch here, Kyle. Once you've given Grove a seizure, you come right back, the older Marcus said. Good enough? Why was it that a lewd smile arose on Kyle's face as he answered? Whatever the reason, it only lasted an instant. Flipping himself over atop the rock, his leather garments sparkled blackly in the gleaming sunlight, and he came down the mountain with the light gait of a supernatural beast. Down he went, over extremely dangerous rocks, not one of which could be tread upon without setting off an avalanche. Page break indicated by a small cross. Coming within 15 feet of the eerie gates, which looked to be wood and stone wired together and strung with hides, D halted his steed. As he looked up at the towering palisade ahead, his expression was redolent of a dashing young poet or philosopher. The air swished to life. Where on earth they'd been hiding was a mystery. No one could be seen or even sensed a moment earlier, but all of a sudden a number of people appeared among the rocks and trees. They surrounded D. The face of each was darkly intrepid, but some among them were pale to the point of transparency, or armored in ghastly scales. They were a band that would no doubt cow any traveler encountering them for the first time, yet, for some reason, with D, they kept their distance. Once they had him surrounded, they made no move to approach him. On realizing that it was fear and wonder that arose on their inhuman faces, the Prince of Hell himself might have doubted his own eyes. With a sharp glance from D, they staggered backward. I'm the vampire hunter D. I have business here. Kindly open the gates. At his bidding, the mysterious gates swung silently inward. Without another glance at the guards to his fore and rear, his left and his right, D rode leisurely in on his horse. As soon as they were inside, a terrible aura enveloped Dee and his seed. Triggered by the eerie emanations Dee himself radiated, all the eldritch energies in the air seemed to shoot toward them as one. Dee's expression didn't change in the least, and his horse never altered its stride. When they'd gone a few steps, the strange roiling energies disappeared. The men who remained positioned around Dee exchanged startled looks. The hunter's unearthly aura had just beaten down their own disturbing emanations. The village and its inhabitants flowed past Dee as he rode. The village had been established in a vast wooded region that had sprung up in the middle of the mountains, and the homes were fashioned from timbers and stone. Most of the residents were self-sufficient as far as food and weapons went, and a building that looked to be a factory could be spied tucked silently among the trees. While they were rather antiquated, there were high-caliber laser cannons and ultrasonic wave cannons visible within the palisade, indicating that the Barbaroi were perfectly prepared to deal with their enemies in the outside world. But what was truly astonishing was the appearance of the inhabitants of the village. Their clothing was the ordinary farm wear or work clothes found in any hamlet, but very few of the arms and legs and heads that protruded from said raiment had the form of anything human. A glimpse of red tongue could be seen flickering from what must have been lips on a face scaled like a serpent's, while another visage was mantled in thick fur like a veritable wolf. Way in the back, an innocent young boy splashed water up from his pool. From the neck down he had the body of a crocodile, and the limbs to match. There existed things in this world that weren't entirely natural, the offspring of couplings between fiendish beasts and human beings. All who dwelled in the village of the Barbaroi were the fruit of those abominable relations. Most humans from the world below would have fainted dead away at the sight of these demons, but Dee rode past them silently. Arriving at what seemed to be a central square. At the center stood the black carriage, along with a hoary-maned old man. Halting his horse at the entrance to the square, Dee stepped to the ground. "Oh," the old man exclaimed, stroking that ground-sweeping white beard of his. "You dismount. I see you know enough to show respect for your elders. But you have me sorely puzzled. How did you ever manage to climb our mountain on horseback?" Whether the words that seemed to slither along the ground reached him or not, Dee took hold of the reins and started walking towards the old man. He stopped 6 feet shy of him and gestured to the black carriage with his right hand. "I'd like you to hand over the 2 passengers in that carriage," he said. The old man smiled broadly, or rather, all the wrinkles on his face twisted up into a smile. But in the laughter that followed there was a hint of scorn. "Young man, you've come into our village in a way no one else has ever managed. I wish I could tell you the passengers in that carriage were yours, but it's too late, too late." "We've already sided with the carriage, you see. The contract is drawn, and we've been paid in gold. Paid with the fabled $10,000 coins, 10 of them. Could you afford that much?" "If I could, would you sell it to your clients?" At Dee's reply, soft as ever, the smile instantly vanished from the old man's face. His wrathful mien was a sight to behold, and it looked like he might even take a swing at the hunter with his cane. But he unexpectedly threw his head back in a way that almost seemed to straighten his spine, and he gave a hearty laugh. Ho, ho, ho. Knowing as you do that this is the village of the Barbaroi, that took nerve to say. Oh, what a treat. What a great treat. Why, the last time anyone spoke to me like that was precisely 320 years ago. A strange expression skimmed across the old man's face, as if groping in the misty depths of forgotten memory with fingers that had lost their sense of touch. He narrowed his eyes impatiently. When he threw them open again, a hue of astonishment spilled from his pupils. That face, he murmured. Could it be that you're... I'm a vampire hunter, Dee said quietly. At the request of the father of an abducted girl, I'm in pursuit of the culprit. I've come here as a result of that, and nothing more. But I understand your position. All I ask is that you put him back outside and let me pursue him in peace. Oh, better yet, a man of principle. The old man seemed beside himself with joy, striking his cane against the earth. Out of respect for that, I'll share a little something with you. What his requests were. One was that we provide him with an escort to protect him from you and other hunters. The other was to dispose of a young man named Dee who was certain to come here. The square was buried in an avalanche of killing lust. While the two were conversing, countless villagers had encircled them. Not a single one of them had a weapon in hand. Nonetheless, each and every one of them had a fearsome air that made it clear they'd have no problem slaying a few humans at a time. What will you do now, Dee? It was remarkable how you made it all the way in here. But getting back out looks to be somewhat more difficult, doesn't it? Every man and woman assembled here has been trained in the most astounding of abilities. No matter how great of a hunter you may be, you can't possibly kill them all. And what was Dee doing as the old man spoke the indisputable truth? He was looking up at the sky, gazing at the perfectly clear blue and the clouds cavorting there. His expression was so intent the villagers stopped closing on him and exchanged looks with each other. So, is that where he wants to go then? Perhaps mistaking the hunter's muttering as a plea for his life, one of the Barbaroi leapt into the air with a cry like a savage beast. When he straightened up, his body was round over all, yet his stomach was flat as a board, a shape that was reminiscent of a tortoise. The beast stretched his arm toward Dee's face. The fingertips fused with the nails and became like the horns of a bull. If they but touched him, they'd gouge away a chunk of flesh and bone. The two figures passed each other, one in the air and one on the ground, and the rotund man landed lightly as he came back to earth. Maybe it was the stirring of the villagers that called forth the bloody mist. A number of them had caught the silvery flash that shot out faster than the eye could follow in the instant the man had passed Dee. But no. They'd certainly seen the man's head pull into his clothing just as Dee's blade was about to strike. Like a tortoise, the man's body was covered by a carapace that was impervious to even bullets, and his hands and feet could stretch like springs. But his carapace cracked down the middle just as he landed. And the face of the man that appeared from the bottom, and the serpentine neck, and the tangle of intestines, all of them had been split in two right down to the crotch, and the man sent up a spray of blood as he toppled. For the first time, the others saw the blade shining in Dee's right hand. There was no one foolish enough among them to press the hunter a second time. and despite the gut-deep rage they felt at the death of their comrade and friend. The realization that this youth possessed an unholy prowess with the sword seeped into the marrow of their bones. In an attitude imposed no different from the one that had greeted his attacker, Dee returned to the old man and said softly, "You can kill me if you like, but many of your villagers will die too. Why don't you stand back and let me stay here until night? When the carriage leaves, I'll go right out after it. That's it. As a lot of you have entered a contract to help the fugitive, I'll ask nothing else." If the decree of certain death the old man had pronounced on Dee was valid, what Dee said was equally true. "So it's just as I thought, then." The old man nodded, his face showing understanding. "Such ability, such dignity," he muttered. "Yes, I was right all along." Then, waving his right hand to the villagers, backed off. He said something unexpected in a wary tone. "If you should ask that all in the village drown in a lake of blood, I could not deny you. I implore you, take the shriveled head of this old fool for our rudeness and grant us your forgiveness." "What are you talking about?" someone shouted. This one angry outburst parted the wall of villagers. A woman in a dress and unsettlingly deep shade of indigo stepped from the mob to stand between the old man and Dee. The spot of pink on her exposed right shoulder was strangely conspicuous against her white skin. Her voice was a venom-dripping howl as she said, "Why the faint-hearted drivel? Elder, have you forgotten the law of our village? Once we've a contract with one who's come seeking our aid, regardless of who they may be, we must uphold the wishes of our employer or die trying. And I, Caroline, intend to do so, with the aid of Mashura and Bengay." "Absolutely," an impudent voice added in agreement. Pushing his way through the ring of people, a middle-aged man of average height and medium build tossed the hem of his great coat and took his place alongside the woman. "By failing to honor a contract we've already agreed to, you'd be doing more than just breaking the law of the village. It would mean the ruin of the village itself. Elder, leave this young pup to the three of us." "My sentiments exactly." The third speaker drew a dramatic reaction. The voice came from behind the middle-aged man, and it must have caught him off guard, because he flinched momentarily and took a step back. Framed by the other two, but standing behind them, was a strangely elongated man, as thin as a praying mantis. His hands and face were as black as if they'd been dipped in ink, and his coat was the color of midnight. Though this was the same color as the leather Kyle garbed himself in, and there was something peculiar about it that gave it an entirely different feel. "I believe we met earlier," the tenebrious man said, winking at Dee. The man was so thin it seemed plausible no one would be able to see him hiding behind a fair-sized pole. But there hadn't even been a single tree nearby to conceal him. "Allow me to do the introductions. The lovely lady you see here is Caroline, while this is Mashura, and I'm Bengay," he said, turning with a smile to the elder. "Since he's already here, there's not much we can do. Elder, you may relent, but we're going through with this. You can strip us of our right to reside here if you so desire." "Friends of his marred my skin," Caroline said in a quivering voice as she pressed her left hand to the pink spot. "I won't forget that. I'll never forget the pain. Even pounding an iron wedge through this rascal's chest won't make it go away." And there must be others besides us who feel the same way. Step forward. But when the middle-aged man, Mashra, had made this call, and the old man shouted, "Idiots!" so loudly that the rebellious trio and a number of villagers coming forward to join them flinched. And that wizened feline form of the old man had caused the group of malcontents 3 times his size to tremble. "Do you fools know I've looked like this since the village was founded? Have you any idea how your ancestors suffered and sweated to build this mountain village after they were chased from their homes for carnal relations with demons? I'll have you know, all their hard work was poised for destruction at one time. Even the young ones, those for whom the past did not yet exist, were riveted in place by the purposefulness of the old man's voice. It was the sort of voice that would steal into their ears even if they had their hands clamped over them. Perhaps the only one who could ignore it was Dee, standing solitary and forlorn. The bloody screams of the old man continued. The bloody screams of the old man continued. On that day, the first day of our 10,000-year history, a horrible toxic gas gushed from the earth and onto our land. Half the villagers died, and the other half could do naught but wait for death as their flesh festered. If a certain personage hadn't appeared, the village would have become the domain of the Grim Reaper, and none of you would have ever been born. Listen well, for that person traveled with a certain grand purpose in mind. He'd heard rumors of us, and was the first to rush here. And this is what he said. Let 5 of your strongest, bravest men accompany me on my journey. If you do, I will take away this calamity that has befallen your village, and fortune shall instantly smile upon you. And this was the first time more than half of the villagers had heard these facts. Engrossed by the sudden tale of days gone by, the villagers failed to notice 2 things that were happening. And the first was that, perhaps due to something in the old man's story, Dee's eyes had begun to give off a piercing light. And the other was that a young man was walking down the road from the supposedly locked main gate, making his way through the deserted village as he headed towards the square. This entire square, the elder continued, and the whole village, for that matter, was filled with rotting, dying souls. But the instant that person's proposition reached their ears, they forgot about all the excruciating pain. And then, one villager came from behind a pile of rubble, over there. Another came from back beyond the withered trees. And the people went to him as if they'd been summoned by name. Exactly 5 of them. What's more, they were the toughest we had, and everyone knew it. The young man approached the entrance to the square. Taking a quick peek around, a charming smile nudged his ruddy cheeks as he headed in. And then, the village of the Barbaroi came back to life. The old man's voice was boundlessly deep. As soon as that personage had left with the 5, why, the ground the village sits on rose toward the sky and came to be where you see it now. In the space of 3 breaths, new growth budded on the trees, and the flowers bore fruit. It wasn't until later we discovered the toxic subterranean gases had been diluted to harmless levels, too. All we could do at the time was chant out his name and press our faces to the ground. "Heed my words," the old man said, his voice that of the elder that commanded all. I'll tell you a law that you youngsters don't know about. When that person or any of his bloodline should appear, then and only then must all in the village bend any subsequent laws and comply with his wishes." His awe-inspiring tone was an order. Even the rebellious trio was speechless. The old man bowed deeply to the beautiful hunter, whose black hair was swaying in the breeze. "Long have we awaited you. All that your highness desires shall be granted. If you wish that carriage ripped apart, or burnt to the ground where it stands, we are yours to command." As they watched him with eyes full of an awe that surpassed fear, Dee's reply came to the villagers' ears. "I appreciate the offer, but you have the wrong person. Let those three go and guard the carriage as they wish. I'll be right behind them." "What are you trying to say?" the old man asked in astonishment. "What an honest fellow." Black Bengay laughed shrilly. "Well, since he says so himself, this law you've brought up doesn't apply, Elder. But in light of his frankness, we won't let anyone else touch him. The three of us alone will take him on. I've one juicy tidbit for you to take to your grave." Caroline laughed, her crimson lips curling back. "This carriage is bound for the Claiborne States." "Let's go, whippersnapper," Mashra cried out as he crouched down. A heavy axe glittered in his right hand. It looked like even the old man lacked the means to forestall the vicious attack by the trio. Just then, a harsh query of, "Who the hell are you?" could be heard from the rear of the crowd. But the question soon became a drawn-out scream. The rows of people kicked up sand as they parted, and, at the far end of the straight path they opened, a rosy-cheeked young man smiled brightly. It was an angelic smile, the kind anyone would return without thinking twice. However, the fetid stench billowing up before him was part of the smoke rising from the chest of a fallen villager. Though it was unclear just what sort of energy had struck the villager, flames were still licking the carbonized and perfectly circular wounds on his chest and back. Dee became a black shooting star flying through the air. The ray beam that shot through the space he'd occupied an instant earlier continued past him. With nothing to strike, it scored a direct hit to the carriage parked to one side of the square. "That's not good," someone cried out. Startled by the flying sparks and energy discharge, the team of horses whinnied especially loud and bolted for the exit on the far side of the square. "Close the back gate." A few villagers ran off in response to the old man's shouts, but an instant later a beam intercepted them, and they fell forward with their heads blown off. Nobody could tell where the beams were coming from. The square had become a place where bolts of light flitted madly, and, as fleeing villagers vanished in the flashes, the origin of the murderous beam still seemed impossible to determine. However, the one clear image that greeted anyone who looked back was the enraptured expression of the angelic young man as he stood by the entrance to the square watching the mad dance of the lights. It was inspiring how his face brimmed with joie de vivre as he gleefully toyed with the deadly rays. All at once, the square reclaimed its original hue. Perhaps it was an after-effect of the powerful white flashes, but the green trees and brown houses burned themselves into the scene in almost painfully deep tones before gradually returning to their natural colors. Villagers creeping to the edge of the square, or in some cases crouched on the ground, watching where this supernatural phenomenon was headed, saw a pair of figures square off with some 30 feet between them. One was a young man wearing an angelic smile. The other was a hunter as beautiful as the moon's corona. Which would prove faster? The racing figure in black, or the coursing stream of white light? Everyone gasped as Dee fended off one white-hot attack, but had two more streaks pierce his body as he dashed forward. But what did the villagers really see and gasp about? Dee had held his left hand out in front on his chest. The two bolts of light changed direction right before him, and became a single flash, and were sucked into the palm of his hand. The young man didn't move. His smile still brimmed with pleasure. Dee's flashing blade flowed from the tip of his foe's head down to his lower jaw. There was no resistance. Still holding the pose from his downward stroke, Dee stood a little closer to the edge of the square. The young man had suddenly disappeared. Dim shadows that played across Dee's face testified this wasn't the result of anything he'd done. The old man ran over to him. "Dee, are you injured, my lord?" Without answering, Dee looked back across the square. There was no sign of the carriage. "Can I get down the back side of the mountain?" he asked. The old man nodded. "There's a passage known only to the villagers. Oh, damn!" the old man shouted, looking around desperately. Dee knew why the elder cursed. The three tufts Merling had retained were nowhere to be seen. Page break indicated by a small cross. Kyle pulled his hot lips away from the woman's body now that resistance had given way to moaning, as it always did. From a bunk that until now had been deathly silent, there trickled the sound of shallow but urgent breathing. Damn it. He's back pretty damn fast this time. Kyle spat irritably and stood up. "Hey, hurry up and get that IV ready," he ordered Layla, who was still stark naked. Glaring sharply at her older brother, the tracks of tears still fresh on her face, Layla gathered her discarded clothing. Glancing at the bruises on her skin and the purple teeth marks from where he'd just bitten her, Kyle clucked his tongue remonstratively. "You should have just behaved like usual and done what I told you. I don't know what got into you today, but that's what you get for being dumb and putting up a fight." Chuckling, he added, "Of course. I suppose it just made it that much easier to get old Grove worked up. Quit it." Layla slapped away the hand reaching for her ample bosom. Lately, the gap between his normal attacks has gotten pretty slim, you know. If you keep forcing Grove to have more on top of those, even though you know it's shortening his life, what do you think is going to happen? If his energy goes wild, no one has any idea how bad the destruction would be. Shit, you think we can read that far ahead? We've got problems right now. We'll know how things went just as soon as Borgoff gets back. Nah, on second thought, I think I'll try asking Grove first. Out of my way. Cruelly pushing Layla aside, Kyle went to the pillow of the third Marcus brother. "Hey bro, it's me, Kyle. Tell me what you saw while you were in there. Remember what I asked you to look into before you went?" For quite a while, the rasping sounds that escaped from a patient at death's door continued, then ceased. A sudden gasp. It hadn't come from the man beneath the blankets. A pale, thin hand was wrapped around Kyle's windpipe. "Want to know, Kyle? You want to know?" Grovek wheezed. "You're here having all the fun, Flayla, while you put me through the tortures of hell, and you want to know?" Yeah. Sure I want to know." It was all the younger Marcus brother could do to answer, with a hand at his throat. The hand quickly fell away. Grovek's delicate voice practically sobbed. "Our prey is heading for the Claiborne States." Chapter 3. End.